Everyone. Today we're going to talk about antibiotic resistant bacteria, which I know is probably not as fascinating to you as it is to me, but just in case. Um, there won't really be spoilers for any of the books because this bacteria is basically the entire premise of all of the books. Um, we're just going to talk about science today and about what a dork I was in high school. I promise it's worth sticking around. If you get grossed out by a bacteria, though, this is one to skip, honestly. Like, just letting you know, we're not going to get super gory or anything like that, but, if you get icked out, maybe skip this one. Okay, so the December plague is actually partially the result of my high school biology class. So, for those of you who don't know, my dad is a high school biology teacher. He was not my high school biology teacher, he was a biology teacher for another high school. But because of that, I always kind of wanted to impress him and be a little extra. So, we had this paper in 10th grade where we had to do a month long experiment. And one thing that always scared the heck out of me was antibiotic resistant bacteria, which was starting to become really noticed when I was in high school. I'm old, in case you didn't know that. It's been around forever. We just started really being concerned about it because a lot of our antibiotics were becoming less effective, especially when I was a child. They stopped giving out um, amoxicillin and went to the next drug for bacteria that needed that because of antibiotic resistance, because people would not finish their dosage or who would ask for it for a lot of, like, for viruses. In case you don't know, just PSA, a virus can't be treated with an antibiotic. And but antibiotics in general are very specific to certain types of bacteria. So you need to make sure that you are taking the correct antibiotic for your bacteria that you're trying to fight. And if you're not trying to fight a bacteria, say if you have a cold or, coronavirus or any other virus, an antibiotic's not going to do anything. But the bacteria that are in your system can become resistant to that antibiotic if you don't take it for the prescribed thing or you don't take it for the full dose, that kind of thing. And that those bacteria can pass along that resistance to other bacteria, basically, and in other people. It can pass on, it can survive better, so it will become harder to kill in the next the next time around. Anyhow, when I was in high school, we had to do this month-long experiment. I had all of my friends cough into a petri dish and incubated it for a month, at the same time treating it with mouthwash, all different brands of mouthwash. And before we go any further, let me just say that as a result of one experiment, so take it with a grain of salt, but Listerine is the best killer of mouth bacteria out there, or it was 20 years ago when I did this. More than 20 years ago now. It smells terrible though when it's mixed with bacteria. So, anyhow, if you're wondering, go Listerine. Not sponsored or anything. So, I had this term paper with this experiment where I got to see firsthand the cultures grow despite having something that killed bacteria. It wasn't an antibiotic, obviously, it's mouthwash, but something that killed bacteria directly applied to it. And in conjunction with this really long experiment, we did a research paper on the subject. So obviously, I did more research on case studies for more serious diseases. Um, in one of the books that I read, that I will also link below, it's actually nonfiction this time, was called The Hot Zone. And I think there's been several editions of it now. Um, if not, it's a good time capsule look back in time. It's very scary, and it's about fighting like the deadliest diseases out there that are bacterial based. I think there were a couple case studies on viruses in that book, but I can't remember clearly. Anyhow, I was terrified, and rightly so, I think, of the next plague, whatever it might be. So that I carried that terror with me, and it might have subsided, except that when I was in college, my mother was diagnosed and fought ALL, adult lymphoblastic leukemia. And partway through her treatment, through her chemo treatment, twice actually, she had to be put on this drug called vancomycin. And I knew from that term paper that vancomycin at that point, and it may have changed now, again, this is 20 years in the past, so I'm sure it has, but at that point in time, it was the last drug that we had for antibiotic resistant bacteria. And antibiotic resistant bacteria then and now, this part hasn't changed, I know, is really bad in hospitals where there's lots of people, lots of sick people, and it's really hard to kill those bacteria. Um, no matter how you clean, no matter how careful you are. And she was going through really aggressive chemotherapy, so she um, was very vulnerable to these antibiotic resistant bacteria. So I was terrified the two times that she had to have this vancomycin. It makes you super sick. Like, you just, it's awful. But it kills whatever bacteria is in you. For her case, it was a staph infection, I believe, or she was exposed to staph. She never had a full infection. Anyhow, fast forward a couple more years, and I went on a zombie reading binge, as one does. For those of you who don't know, I tend not to read in the same genre I'm writing in at the moment. So at that point, I was writing my first published book. It was a fantasy book. So I was expressly not reading fantasy. So I started reading zombie books. Not that I needed much encouragement. I've always loved zombie books and post apocalyptic books. But it occurred to me while I was reading literally hundreds of zombie books that there are many causes. Excuse me one second. Excuse me. There are many causes of the zombie apocalypse out there. Most of them, though, are either viral, chemical, or some weird technology. You never see bacteria as a cause, which to me didn't make much sense until I started really thinking about it. And I realized the reason that most zombie books don't use bacteria is because bacteria can be cured, unlike a virus. A virus, your body has to fight off on its own. You can't, like, there are um, methods now, as we saw with COVID, and in, say, Outbreak, that movie Outbreak, they used a antivirus or retrovirus to fight the infection. But normally, it it is your body just has to fight it off. Um, so I decided that I was going to start writing this story about what happens after you actually cure a bacterial infection of a zombie variant. One second. So, when I started doing some research, I went with the symptoms of a classic zombie. to find a bacteria that would work. I thought when I started that it was going to be like I was going to make up a bacteria um, based on the Staphylococcus bacteria because that's most commonly the most antibiotic resistant bacteria, and I knew I wanted to make it something it couldn't kill very easily. Also, during this time, I was playing. There's this little game app called Plague Inc. where you try to make this plague, this pandemic that will infect everybody, see how far you get. And it's very reassuring, actually, if you want to go look it up. Um, it it's I don't know how realistic it is, but it shows like how easily diseases are actually stopped by our, you know, infrastructure and their own frailty. So anyway, I was researching all these vectors for an for a bacteria, and to my surprise, staph was, still a good option, but there actually is a syndrome that has to do with strep throat, which is also extremely antibiotic resistant. Not as bad as staph, but it's getting there. So there's this existing syndrome in children who have undertreated strep infections, streptococcus infections, and it's called pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcus, or PANDAS for short. And it has a lot of the same symptoms that you would find in a zombie. um, Obviously, they're not dead, and it's very mild versions of these, but I thought it would work for my book. So the actual syndrome is usually in adolescents and kids, and it causes things like slurring of speech, um, stumbling, pica, which is for people that don't know, pica is when you want to eat something that's not edible. A lot of times, like pregnant women will get pica because they're missing a nutrient in their diet. Like a common one apparently is chalk. If you want to chew on chalk, that's a form of pica. It's dangerous. Don't ever give in to those urges, but it does occur in real life. And the big one was aggression. When these kids are seen, a lot of times they're misdiagnosed for other things, like neurological problems or mental health problems or a whole host of other things. But if the doctor catches it, because a lot of times the strep infection can be so low it barely even shows up in lab results. So if you don't know to look for it, you won't find it. But when if a doctor does discover it and they treat that strep infection, all of these symptoms actually go away, including the aggression. So I thought that would work perfectly. Obviously, for mine, we dialed it up to 11, and it infects adults as well as children. And I don't know, like, I did a lot of research on it, but obviously I'm not a doctor. I don't know if there is a difference between the adolescent brain where it infects those areas and affects them differently than it would an adult. But I do know that it can also affect people that carry strep. There's natural carriers of strep bacteria. In fact, I happen to be one of them. um, so in in a lot of times, I can have no symptoms of a strep infection and can accidentally give it to other people if it's been passed to me. So I'm asymptomatic, something that we now all know about because of COVID. Anyhow, so I thought that this bacteria would work really well. And as I was writing the book, I wanted to lean into the horror, and I knew that strep was very antibiotic resistant. So I did some more research on how things had changed since I'd originally researched antibiotic resistance. And the NDM plasmid that I talk about in the book that Noah is horrified by, that is an actual plasmid, and it can change the protein casing on the bacteria. And that is a lot of times what gives it the resistance because it changes the shape. Basically, for the this is a very a very basic way of describing it, but it changes the shape. So you have like your bacteria, and if it's smooth, then the antibiotic can't grip onto it anymore. But if it's got little like tendrils, then the antibiotic can grip it and bind it. Anyhow, um, that is what that antibiotic resistance is based on in the book. That's why the new plague, the second one, is such a danger because that one has the plasmid to change the casing. So the original antibiotic, the original cure, won't work any longer on that. So that's a little history. Let me see if there was anything else I wanted to tell you about that. No, I think that's it. That's a little history of the December plague. And if I could tell you anything, it's make sure that you take the antibiotics prescribed to you. They're full dose, so you don't promote any antibiotic resistance. Do not take or ask for antibiotics if you do not have the bacteria that's vulnerable to them. And don't let your kid do a month-long experiment incubating mouth bacteria and trying to kill it with mouthwash. It smells terrible. My relatives will, tell you what a terrible experience that was and how I probably should have done a baking soda volcano in high school rather than this project. Otherwise, your kid's gonna end up writing weird zombie books in the future. All right, so we will see you next time when we will talk about, let's see here. Oh, we're gonna talk about Anne next time and a weird kids book that she's kind of based on. All right, I'll see you later.